Hello, I'm the Dark Master, and welcome back to my Kirby Right Back at You Retrospective. In today's installment of the Retrospective, we shall be talking about episode 74, Caterpillar Thriller, or as it's known in Japan, Counter Attack of Mashugaba, or Masugaba's Revenge, depending on what specific dub you're using. Alright, so this episode was originally released in Japan on March 15th, 2003, as the 74th episode, and then the English dub, done by the infamously bad 4Kids, was released on October 2nd, 2004, also as the 74th episode. Let us start this moth-tastic episode review, as always, with the story of the episode. Unlike most episodes, this one begins on a tropical landmass entirely separate from Cape Town. We see a parrot fly past as the camera pans down on a pair of miniature people who are standing on a flower. Since the new characters of the week, let us discuss them now. These are the Island Sisters, and before you ask, they do not have individual names, but interestingly, each sister does have a voice actor in both versions. In the Japanese original, one is voiced by Yuko Mizutani, who is a voice actress who also voices Mabel and Ladylike in anime, as well as Pinocchio in the anime Blackjack. The second sister is voiced by Madoka Arita, who is an actress that also voiced Bookum's wife and Nunako from the anime Nana 7 of 7. And they both do a wonderful job. The English dub is, of course, done by a different pair of actresses. First being Tara Sands, who also voiced Fololo Fala and Anna Kiyoyama in Shaman King, an anime. And the second sister is Amy Burbaum, who also is well known for voicing Kirby himself in the anime, as well as Max from the Pokemon series. Honestly, I think both versions have amazing voice acting, but the English dub did remove one thing that I think kind of weakens the performance, that being Mashugaba's song. It is an allusion to the Mothra song seen in the original Mothra kaiju movie released in 1961. However, unlike that song, which was just sort of garbled Indonesian language, this one is actually in Japan and has some deeper meaning. As for who Masugaba is, patience. You see, the song is sort of a pastiche of Nintendo, as the line's referring to how, at the time, HAL Laboratory had a third office and a development center in the Nintendo Tokyo Prefecture building, which was large. Admittedly, the meaning is a bit obscure, but I think the complete removal was a shame. Interestingly, in the Japanese original, the Island Sisters are also called the Twin Nuts, which is a rather obscure reference to the fact that the actresses in the original Mothra movie that, sang the song were part of a pop singing group called the Peanuts. Honestly, I think the name change was good, as I don't know why, but I think having two women called Twin Nuts seems kind of weird, and is a reference I think most wouldn't get. Overall, a fun pair of characters, as we shall see them more later in this episode. Now, you may be wondering exactly who is this Masugaba that the song is referring to. Well, as we resume with the story, you will get your answer as the camera pans over to the creature, which is a gigantic caterpillar. This monster of the week, Masugaba, is a giant caterpillar that is seen eating an entire palm tree that really emphasizes its size. It has no voice actor, but I must say I love the design, as it definitely reminds me of the more robust caterpillars seen in like swallowtails and other larger butterflies. It also has the honor of being one of the few anime specific monsters to have the same name in the English dub as in Japan. And obviously it's an allusion to the caterpillar form of Mothra. I didn't think I needed to explain that, but I figured I'd just say it anyway. Resuming with the plot, everything is nice until suddenly it goes dark, and the hand of Nightmare himself grabs the poor island sisters and drags them into the shadow realm. Masugaba looks up in concern as we see a bird's eye view of the island, which is called Embryo Island in the Japanese original, a reference slash parody of the island in the movie Mothra called Infant Island. The English dub sadly changed this to a far more utilitarian name of South Sea Island, which is a shame, really. We then cut to the jazzy intro. After the jazzy intro, we cut to Castle Deity slash Capitan as a bunch of yellow wind blows around. We see the king wandering the castle's halls, calling for his waddle dees, but is shocked to see them all sneezing. He murmurs something as we see Waddle-Doo is also sneezing despite having no nose or mouth. The king goes up to Waddle-Doo to ask why he and the others are not at their post, and Waddle-Doo tries to answer but starts to sneeze. The king adorably picks him up and redirects the snot as Waddle-Doo then resumes, saying that it's hard to do their work as they are all very sick with the sniffles. Escargoon walks up and explains that he too is sick. The king laughs that everyone except himself is sick. And Escargoon remarks that in order to get a head cold, you have to have something in your head. This dialogue is a subtle reference to the events of episode 63, Something to Sneeze At, which I've reviewed before if you'd like to learn more. Realizing this, Escargoon says the illness must be something other than a common cold. The king presses for more as the snail continues saying that there are multiple sicknesses with similar symptoms. He is about to sneeze as the king luckily picks up Waddle-Doo and uses him as a human shield, leading to the face mask being splattered all over poor Waddle-Doo's face, enraging the little guy. While the king comments on how this is quite a sneeze and how he luckily has these little guys to use as shields. Laughing, we then pan over to Cappytown itself, where we see the Cappies are coughing as well for the same mysterious reasons. We see Bookums the mayor, Professor Curio, and Melman the mailman comment on it. Bookum says that the whole town is becoming a sick ward. Melman says that his sinuses are stuffy. The mayor agrees, continuing on saying this head aches and then sneezes. Then Curio says his eyes are watery and his throat scratchy as he then coughs, and we pan over to Kawasaki's restaurant, where we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, the blue flags from Kawasaki's restaurant have kanji on them. 4Kids, for unknown reasons, sadly saw fit to airbrush them out, and I think it's a shame, as it really isn't that harmful of a background detail. In either case, we then enter the restaurant. Kawasaki delivers Samo his food, and to his disgust then sneezes over it. He says that he hates being sick as his sneezes get into the feud. Of course, Gus is disgusted by this, and Cerebrum and Ladylike are deeply disturbed by this lack of hygiene and decide to flee the restaurant, as does Gus. Kawasaki tries to stop them, saying that was all a joke, only to sneeze, and Kirio says it's spreading fast. Bookum says that they should go to a doctor, while Sir Ibram comments on his feeling not well as well, and then he and his wife start sneezing. She says that he must have caught herself a cold, but then her daughter Tiff shows up with her brother in masks and says that it is no cold. Bookums asks them what they do have then if it's not a cold, and the mayor sneezes. Tiff explains that she and her brother have a diagnosis as we then see a look under a microscope as we see some pollen and the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, the pollen grains are moving around, while the English dub has them be static. Both versions are fine, though admittedly the English version is more realistic, as usually you don't really see a lot of pollen moving under a microscope. Bookums looks at the pollen, with the mayor pushing him out of his way to get a look for himself. Tiff then explains that at certain times plants release lots of pollen. By the way, as a biology major, I know this, but did you know that pollen is the male gametes of plants? So literally, it's plant semen. Your sneezing is caused by plants gooning. Dr. Yabui explains that this is called hay fever, and the mayor sneezes in confusion. Tiff then explains that everyone has an immune system and that pollen unfortunately tricks it into activating, though it's harmless. Dr. Yabui then explains the obvious that the pollen causes sneezing. And this is actually true, by the way. Hay fever is a real thing, though admittedly it uses different, more technical names nowadays. Tiff adds on that as Bookums is shocked that a plant can make someone so miserable, Curio asks if there's anything they can do. How Dr. Yabui answers is where we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, he gives a fairly standard advice, like don't inhale pollen and always rinse your eyes and mouth out after you've been outside. He then sneezes, and the campies leave unbothered. In the English dub, this has changed to him making the absolutely absurd medical advice that they just simply hold their breath until the pollen goes away, before sneezing, and the campies leave all overtly rather annoyed. Honestly, while the English dub is more funny, I actually prefer the Japanese original here because I don't think Dr. Yabui is that incompetent, at least according to his presence in past episodes. Sure, he's not perfect, but I don't think he would make that sort of advice. As they leave, Tiff realizes that if everyone is sick at the same time, that means something must have changed, as she points out that the wind is quite literally visible due to the sheer amount of yellow pollen. Everyone is shocked as the mayor says he hasn't seen clouds of pollen like this before, and Bookums claims that it's no wonder they're sick. Curio tells them to go inside, and everyone runs inside. Tiff wonders how this sudden influx of pollen could exist naturally, while her brother suggests that someone could be stirring it up, but Tiff wonders who would be silly enough to do that. We cut to a nearby conifer forest where we see the king inspecting a pollen-laden pine tree. He then hits it with his hammer, raining down pollen everywhere. He then has the Waddle Dees cut down some trees and ties it to a rope at the back of his limousine and drives through Cape Town, releasing tons of pollen that coat everything. We see Tiff and Tuff in helmets comment on this as they seemingly stayed up to catch whoever's up to it. Tuff says he doesn't know why he's doing that, and it's making everyone sick. His sister then points out that probably he's doing it on purpose, for evil reasons. We cut to Kirby's house as we see an entire pine tree is inserted and shook into his house, causing the horrible bird Takori to start sneezing, which is actually kinda okay. We then go to Kirby as he is sleeping in his tree, as the water leaves have piled up a huge pile of pollen. Dedede smacks Two with his hammer, causing Kirby to fall face first into the pile of pollen. Dedede then feeds him some, but he seems to be completely unaffected to the king's shock. Tiff calls him out, to which the king and his goons sneakily escape. Tiff surmises that the king is trying to make Kirby sick, while her brother says that not even a huge pile of pollen can get him to start sneezing. Takori, the egotistical bird, complains that he's sick, though, before sneezing so bad he falls to the ground. Hopefully he gets a concussion. We cut back to Castle Dedede as we see Escargoon sneezing as he tries to eat. He grumbles at the king, annoyed by his plot making everyone so miserable, saying that this is sickening, and claiming that even the food must be filled with pollen, and indeed, in the Japanese original, it's outright stated to be made of such, perhaps another plot in order to make Kirby sick. Dedede, in a rare bout of humility, admits that he may have gone a bit far in places, and Escargoon asks why, to which the king says it's of course part of his newest plan to get rid of Kirby by eliminating his ability to suck things up. He calls up the enemy sales guy, who greets the king nicely as the king explains to the guy his plans and the need for something that causes hay fever. The enemy sales guy explains that he's got just a monster with a special dust that'll do the trick. Escargoon says that this must be have a catch, but the sales guy assures them that he says that Mugaba is legit, but he won't come for anybody, and via the monster delivery system, sends over the Island Sisters, who are, of course, shocked and stuck in a cage, and the king glares at them. The sisters plead to be freed by the king, and he says that he will, but only if they call their monster friend Masugaba over. With no other choice, the two reluctantly agree to the king's demand, and they start singing, which echoes in the castle and even awakens Tiff from bed. She gets up and with a shock as her little brother is looking near her bed, as he explains that somebody is singing in the castle. She wonders what it is, while her brother asks what it means, as Tiff is not sure. But as they sing, we see Masugaba swimming to dreamland. We cut to Kine, who is awakened as we see the giant caterpillar arrive in Capitan, creating a wave that scares the useless sunfish off. We cut to Kirby's house where we see the horrid bird Takori is sick in bed, and he berates Kirby, who's only trying his best to help his friend who is clearly very sick. He blasphemes the king for his latest plan. The building shakes and Takori arrogantly assumes it must only be himself. Kirby leaves the house to investigate, with Takori angry at the baby's abandonment despite him visibly getting annoyed at him, and chooses to go after him. In the conifer first, we see Takori complain about Kirby running away, but alongside the pink puffball are shocked to see the big bug, which is absolutely huge and has no fear of Kirby. Kirby goes over and prods the beast as he tries to talk to it, so it can stop, and it responds by spraying him with silk, making him roll down the hill as Takori petulantly cries in false concern and chases after Kirby. We see the mayor and his wife awaken from their sleep by the great caterpillar which they look out at. We cut to the castle where we see a Waddle Dee scout catch sight of the giant caterpillar as the whole castle is in uproar. Escargoon complains about the sounds as Dedede exits his room and demanding an explanation as he hits Waddle Doo by the opening door. Waddle Doo, non-bothered by this, explains that they are under attack by a giant beast. The two look on in shock, not recognizing this as the very monster they ordered, and the king tells them to stop it. Waddle Doo then orders the Waddle Dees to fire their cannons, and they unleash a barrage upon the giant bug. Dedede stares intently, but it is revealed that the cannonballs had basically no impact, and it continues forwards. It pauses briefly at the moat, but it then raises itself and leans on the side of the castle, much to the chagrin of the king and Escargoon. The camera pans down as we see Tiff and her family look on in horror. Sir Ibram says this is an outrage, while Ladylike is shocked that this is a caterpillar, as Tiff, in shock, points out the beast, which wraps itself in a silken cocoon. Meanwhile, Takori and Kirby, who is still covered in some silk strands, show up and react in shock as the creature turns itself into a cocoon as morning breaks. We then cut to a broadcast of Channel Dedede as Escargoon announces what just happened, as various Cappies and Kawasaki comment and react with a mixture of disbelief and shock. Kawasaki foolishly doubts it'll hatch, as when pressed by Tuggle it says that it has no zipper, but Tiff runs up and explains that it'll hatch, but it'll no longer be a caterpillar when it emerges. Professor Curio backs her up by saying that it will transform into a new form, with Tiff going as far as to say it'll become a butterfly. She's almost correct, though. The king, however, on a megaphone announces that people have seen enough and this eyesore, and claiming that they must get rid of it. We then see Waddledees put up piles upon piles of wood in order to set it ablaze and kill the beast. Tiff says he can't, with the king asking why not, to which Tiff says it's alive, and about to emerge as Tuff says that they can't destroy it. King tells them to be silent as the water leaves set fire to it as the crowd looks on in shock. Mennonite comments on this as we see the final change between versions. In the Japanese original, he says that the heat might hasten its awakening, and the English dub changes this, however, to him hoping that the cocoon can last a bit larger. In either version, it's perfectly fine, and his role is admittedly very minor in this episode. The cocoon seems to begin to crack, much to everyone's shock. It is revealed to be fine, and as Tiff says, the fire must have sped up the development process. The creature fully comes into form as the king wonders what that is, as Escargoon, basically explains the obvious. The giant moth begins flying, which releases powerful blasts of air. Tuff says even more pollen is horrible, but Tiff corrects her brother, saying that this dust is from the beast's wings and is not pollen, but is much stronger. In fact, most butterflies and moths have a layer of scales on their wings. That's where the name Lepidoptera comes from, because it means scale wings. The king laughs that finally the monster he ordered arrive, but begins coughing as the dust affects him as well. The Cappies flee, and after a commercial break, we see Dedede staring at the beast as Kirby takes some initiative and tries to suck him up, but only succeeds at getting allergies as he too begins to cough. Tiff wonders what is wrong as her brother deduces that it seems that even Kirby gets sick from the moth's dust. The king mocks the sick Kirby as Escargoon pleads with the king to go inside, but the stubborn buffoon says that they gotta finish Kirby off while he's weak, but then he starts sneezing, causing him to roll downhill with Escargoon in tow. Tiff, thinking fast, calls upon Kaboo, who releases the Warp Star. Kirby jumps on it, but Mugaba manages to shoot him even in the air, causing him to lose his footing for a bit, though eventually regains it as he coughs some more and gains his composure. Sadly, even with this, the beast is too large, and Kirby struggles against him as seen when he flies near the beast. Tiff is greatly concerned about how they can help when Escargoon shows up. She asks how it can go away, and sick of the allergies, Escargoon, in the first time in this series, directly goes against King Dedede's wishes and helps undo the guy's plans by handing the pair a key to the cage. Dedede is holding the beast's little friends in. She asks where they are, as we then cut to Kirby, who is still struggling against the giant moth. Tiff and Tuff enter the king's room, where we see the island sisters in the small cage. They ask who the sister is, and after introductions, Tuff asks if they know about the monster outside as a friend, and they confirm, saying that they called him here. Tiff says it's fighting Kirby, angered, but the two little ladies assure her that the beast is normally very peaceful and is only acting this way due to the situation that the king has put them in, and says that they can sing to calm the creature down. Tiff gladly agrees, unlocking the cage and bringing the pair of them outside. The two then begin singing, which gets the moth to stop attacking Kirby and go over to look as it rests on the castle. Kirby goes over, and after a little bit of a sneeze, the Island Sisters assure him and the others that they will get soon well, as the allergies will go away once they leave. Kirby cheers and helps the thankful Island Sisters get back on their giant friend, and the three fly off. The group cheers, but the king whines that they must stay so he can finish the plan, but to no avail. Dedede and Escargoon slump over in sadness as Tiff says they have to find a cure for these two, and the episode ends with a shot of the island. Now let's discuss the episode's positives, negatives, and my final thoughts on the episode as a whole. Starting with the positives, I have to say that the story itself is, sure, heavily inspired by Mothra, and as someone who has never seen that movie, I still think it works for those who don't get what it's referencing, which is honestly a work of a good reference where you can still enjoy something even if you don't get it. I thought that the inclusion of pollen was a neat thing, as anyone who suffers from it can really empathize with it, such as myself and others. Pollen can be quite annoying. Mugaba was honestly a striking monster of the week due to the sheer size of him compared to most other monsters we've seen, as he really does have a striking presence. And the Island Sisters, for as small as they are, were, very charming, as their song would interestingly be remixed for both Kirby Mass Attack and Kirby and the Rainbow Curse. Kirby's Mass Attack even had reference to the island itself, so honestly, I wish they'd show up in the games. And you have to wonder why that never happened, as I think it's a real missed opportunity. I also thought Nightmare appearing was cool, as we don't really see him much, sadly, in this anime, and this is the first time he's played an active role in an episode himself. I also thought Escargoon deciding to betray Dedede showed that he was much more nuanced than just being the king's blind lackey and has his own interests. With that, let us now go on to the negatives some have with this episode. Starting with those that others share, I've heard many say that the plots, of this episode is only enjoyable if you know the original movie. I disagree with that, as I didn't watch the movie prior to this review and I enjoyed it. So I think that you will enjoy it, though I do agree some of the more subtle references, like how the gleam in the Island Sister's eyes are referenced to Mothra's symbol, might be missed if you don't know the inspiration. Plus, a lot of the more subtle references were outright removed in the English dub, which is a shame. Another criticism that others have said is that the Island Sisters are little more than damsels in distress, a supposedly sexist trope. To that I say, which I consider a very silly criticism, that while yes, they are indeed prisoners, one must keep in mind that they are absolutely minuscule, being able to be carried with the hands of small children. Do you honestly think it's that them being women is the reason that Nightmare and Dedede can easily capture them? I think if you think that, you're genuinely extremely stupid or naive. Honestly, I don't understand. People have such a lack of nuance in these stuff where they see, oh, this trope, therefore it must intrinsically be bad. When no, I think this episode fully utilizes them in a fine, understandable way. If these guys, were dudes, if they were the Island Brothers, they'd still be helpless because they're minuscule. I mean, they literally can stand on a flower. Honestly, in my view, the two real negatives were the changes between versions that led to censorship of Japanese stuff like the kanji, and making Dr. Yubui look way more incompetent than he was before in previous episodes. Another minor issue, I think, is how Mennonite just seems thrown in there, out of obligation, to the point that both versions have dialogue changes that I really have no thoughts on, honestly. Overall, as for my final thoughts, I think this episode is pretty solid. If not outright a must watch, it's definitely one that you should not skip if you're marathoning the series, and I think it's honestly a good one. Yeah, the lack of a copyability and some of the other flaws I mentioned earlier prevent it from being a perfect, but I still think it's definitely checking out. I'm the Dark Master, and if you like this video, you liked it, but if you love it, consider subscribing, and join me next time on the Kirby Right Back at Ya Retrospective. Have a wonderful day.